The intention of all the Learning from the Experts podcasts is organizational learning. With these videotaped interviews, we have attempted to capture and transfer some of the organizational knowledge associated with the Yellowstone National Park fires of 1988. These podcasts will provide you with an opportunity to hear how very experienced fire managers with deep smarts, worked through a variety of highly complex and novel fire management challenges. It is our hope that as you watch these interviews, you will reflect on what these experts had to say and then use their lessons learned to enhance your own performance. But how does one use a videotaped interview to mimic a recognized fire expert's managerial behaviors? It is one thing to say that Yellowstone Park Superintendent Bob Barbee possessed a huge reservoir of resiliency during the summer of 1988, but it is quite another matter to watch Barbee's podcast and then to make his resiliency one's own. Of course, the best option would be to have Bob Barbee as your personal coach, but in lieu of that, the next best option would be to view his podcast and then to design your own personal program of practice based on his interview. Research in adult learning has shown that people who want to become much better at what they do purposely design programs to deliberately practice performance improvements. They specifically target weaknesses in their own performance and design a program to correct those weaknesses. This form of skill acquisition and performance improvement is called deliberate practice. Jeff Colvin, senior editor-at-large at Fortune magazine and author of Talent is Overrated, defines deliberate practice this way. Deliberate practice is designed specifically to improve performance, often with a teacher's help. It can be repeated a lot. Feedback on results is continuously possible. It's highly demanding mentally, whether the activity is purely intellectual, such as chess or business-related activities, or heavily physical, such as sports, and it isn't much fun. What you are going to be asked to do at the end of these 6 Deep Smarts interviews is to design your own program of deliberate practice, using the interviews as a starting point. As you watch these Yellowstone fire experts, note areas of expertise that, if deliberately practiced, would increase your proficiency as a fire manager. Bob Barbee was superintendent of Yellowstone National Park during the 1988 fire season. Tremendous political and media attention was focused on him, with some politicians even asking that he be fired. In this interview, Barbee describes the difficulties trying to explain complex natural resource issues to non-experts, and the need for natural resource professionals to possess political skills.
Modeling, invariably you get into a controversial situation with modeling and those sorts of things, and there's somebody who's going to come along. You find an expert that's going to come along and say the model is flawed mathematically, and if you're the manager and you got all these smart people that are a lot smarter than you are, they were smarter than me anyway. Cumulative effects models, for example, they're very complicated. I went to Washington with the assistant secretary, with Senator Stevens and others, trying to convince them that our cumulative effects model on grizzly bear habitat was valid, and it was something we could base management decisions on, whether to put a facility here or not put a facility. And they look at you like you're chewing lotus seeds. When you start talking about coefficients and you use, that's a recipe for failure, to try to explain to people, managers, not managers, but political people who are very bright in their own right, but they don't know anything about what you're talking about. And you start using modeling jargon, cumulative effects modeling, whatever it is. I used to have to say, now look at, when they explained it to me, I said, take me gently by the hand and explain this in some kind of terms that even I can understand. But then you don't go to Senator Simpson and says, let me take you by the hand and explain this in some sort of terms that you understand. So technical explanations are, you need them, they're fine, but don't don't depend on them carrying the day for you. Yeah, I recommend that that when you're academically, when you're training yourself or getting trained, if you want to call it trained or educated, you just jump out of your field, you know. And in my case, I mentioned public administration and political science. And because you may be the greatest technical person in the world, but you know, you're not going to, if you want to sell your program, you're going to have to learn some other skills. And they're not quantifiable skills. They're qualitative in a lot of ways. They're political skills, if you will. And everybody thinks, well, I'm not going to sell my soul, you know, I'm not going to sell out to politics. I've heard that innumerable times. Well, what is politics, you know? Politics is just the art and craft of deciding who gets what, when, and how. You know, it's basically whose policy is going to get adopted here. You better learn how to, if you want your program to go, you better learn something about it, the political process and how it works. And it isn't pretty. You know, it's not pretty, and people don't always play fair. And if you can't handle that, then you better stick to the you know, you better be the guy or the person in the, you know, back in the back room. You know, we don't have to deal with that.
Superintendent Bob Barbee spoke of 3 key areas of expertise that are important in improving your performance as a fire manager. First, the difficulty in explaining natural resource issues to non-experts using complex models. Second, the importance of diversifying your expertise. Third, the importance of learning about political processes.
Phil Perkins started firefighting in 1972. Phil was a BLM smoke jumper and obtained a Master's of Forestry degree in fire science from Colorado State University. He spent over 20 years working fires in Yellowstone Park.
He was incredible, and of course, he was the superintendent when I showed up in '85, and was there, I think, until '94. So I had, he actually knew my name when I showed up the first day. He knew who I was. I assumed who he was, just by his demeanor. He was a superintendent, but he knew me before I knew him. So I mean, that's just a lot of respect, a very personable man. But he, again, I think I was telling you earlier that he came over to us and he said, "You guys go do your job." He said, "I don't want to hear or see anything in print, in newspapers, or on the media where you're criticizing someone else. That's not your job." He said, "We're above that. We're better than that. We're not going to get into the he said, she said, or they said, we said. We're not going to get into those games. This is not the time and place. You go do your job. You got an important job to do. Take care of your people. Go fight the fires. I will take care of the meeting of this stuff." And he did, and got the utmost respect for him. I think he had, his priorities, straight. I never saw him flustered. I never saw him get mad. I never saw him seem overwhelmed when, I just couldn't imagine what he was having to deal with. They were burning him in effigy. They were writing bad things about him and his family in the newspaper every day. And how to punch somebody out if it had been me. It was really mean stuff, and, no business there. So he was criticized, as and called names, and it just, never affected his performance. I never saw him get mad or angry, just kind of like, water off a duck's back, it just, so I could see he was at a different level than other managers were. He really had the big picture. He knew what was best for the park. And one of the best decisions, and it was criticized from us, and I think I probably criticized it, was leaving the park open. But in looking back, he says the visitors need to see this. They need to be educated, and if it's safe, we're going to let them. If it's not safe, we won't. We felt like, we should just shut it down so we can, drive through the park at 70 miles an hour and get to where we're going faster and not have traffic, and we can go about fire business. But people came in, they saw, and educated the public. nobody got hurt. The big one was, you know, how did you handle the criticism? I asked him that personally. This was, I don't know, maybe a year or so later, you know, I had the chance to do that. And he just said, you know, it wasn't personal. You know, I didn't take it personal. I was, you know, I was in charge, and they wanted, you know, American people need an answer. They like scapegoats, and, you know, I like to blame people for things that they, you know, see that they think went wrong, and they want somebody to pay for it because I didn't take it personal, you know. And so, you know, I asked him the big question I wanted to ask, and that was it. I think I told him, I said, well, I'd punch somebody out, and he just laughed, you know. I said, yeah, you know, yeah. You know, they didn't really mean it, you know. I just go. So that's still above me, you know, that kind of an attitude. You know.
Bill Perkins observed areas of managerial expertise in Bob Barbee that he admired, primarily Barbee's ability to establish priorities and how to withstand sharp criticism without taking it personally. From a deliberate practice perspective, the question becomes, how can you take the attributes Phil admired in Bob Barbee and through repeated practice make them part of your management repertoire?
During the Yellowstone fires, Bill Hallinan was a communication information officer working for the Department of Interior in Washington, D.C. His primary responsibility was to re-disseminate Yellowstone fire information to personnel throughout the Department of Interior.
Probably most consequentially in understanding ICS and the role of information officer in the overall operation of an incident. Let me clarify that a little bit, because we learned something collectively, I think, and that is that an IO has to be more than just a public information person. IOs also have an internal audience. It took us, and I'm speaking narrowly now, just the National Park Service, over the course of a number of incidents after Yellowstone. Each time we refined it a little bit more, but we finally got to the point where I think all the IOs understand that they have equal responsibilities, and ICs understand that too, and you might add plans chiefs, because a lot of the information that you get that you have to disseminate comes right out of the planning function. But people now understand much more than they did then, the need for accurate, timely internal information to your own organization. If nothing else, because it makes your life a lot easier if you get the word out quickly. Yeah, that was probably the biggest lesson. And even though I have not formally sat on either our national or our regional incident management teams, I'm always considered an adjunct when they go in the field. They have the IOs, and then there's a dotted line over here for the internal communications guy who's still sitting at home. But you know that you get that information to me, I can get it out for you. So, useful lesson.
A primary experience for Bill Hallinan was to fully understand the implications of collecting, organizing, and dispensing fire information for both internal and external audiences, all within the context of the Incident Command System. However, it is important to note that Bill was specifically challenged by the information exchange with an internal audience.
During the 1988 fires, Joan Anselmo, working for Superintendent Bob Barbee, was the Chief of Public Affairs and Park Spokeswoman for Yellowstone National Park. Barbee has said he could not imagine having survived the 1988 fire season without Joan Anselmo.
I think that in 1988, just knowing how to frame the message and how to respond to such a diversity of news media, many who were quite hostile. I mean, I was working from my gut. I knew the information. I certainly knew the park. I knew what I had to get out to the public. And so I didn't have nearly the knowledge base in 1988 of fire management, of the lingo. I didn't understand the way that the media was going to use some of those things against us, but I was operating from gut and instinct on how to treat people, how to treat the news media, how important it was to get that story out. I don't know if that's a great example. There probably have been other things where there may have been more life-threatening or high-risk decisions that, you know, you got to make a quick decision. You can't be indecisive, and listening to your instincts. I'm sorry that I can't give you just like right away a perfect example of that, but what I do know, and I've shared this with my friends who are very close to me over the years, is that I really have come to trust that some of how I operate as a manager is instinctual, it's visceral, it's not always a highly learned science. But that comes from being a good observer of people, and even going back to studying foreign language. I chose to go overseas to study foreign language at a pretty young age, at 17. And I have extra good hearing, as I've suggested, and I have a talent for mimic and a really strong memory. And my staff, the negative stuff my staff would tell you is she never forgets anything. And so if I say something 3 months ago or 2 years ago, I might have perfect recall of some of those discussions, and I'll say, nope, this is what I said. And if someone goes back and checks the notes or whatever. So staff who know me well and who I respect and who respect me will say, you know, don't underestimate her memory. So I think memory, hearing, observation, a curiosity about people, about cultures, and when you study language, it's not just that you're mimicking a language, you're studying how people think, you're studying how a culture evolved and how we communicate. And I think that I have become a master at the use of language in telling my agency story. Being able to say something one way and have it have an effect versus saying it sloppily and having a different effect. Another thing I often told firefighters then, and I certainly have talked to senior elected officials when I've helped prepare them for news interviews after disasters, after emergencies, is when there's a really serious situation and you're live on one of the morning shows, or in this day and age, live on one of the evening cable shows, and someone has just died or someone's home has just burned down, don't look in the camera and smile and say it's so great to be talking to you tonight. You know, you need to be reflective of what you're talking about. And so many inexperienced people get that first time. They don't necessarily want it, but they get it. It's like, you know, live at 5 on the Today Show or live on the evening news, and you're the one pushed up to the front to do that interview because you happen to be the incident commander or you happen to be the firefighter who saw the situation come down, and you're so frozen because you're not experienced enough, and it just comes off. It's as bad as that comment that was so hurtful, the burn baby burn. If someone has just died and you're smiling and saying, I'm so glad to talk to you this morning, Mr. Anchor Person, that's not a good thing. You have to be in tune with what's happening around you.
Joan Anselmo discusses many relevant areas of expertise, including be a good observer of cultures and people, be a master in using the English language to craft your message, and trusting your gut intuitions, your instincts. There are many other areas of expertise discussed in Joan's interview. If you have found other themes of more personal interest than the ones just listed, feel free to use them in your program of practice.
During the Yellowstone fires of 1988, Walt Dabney was Chief Ranger for the National Park Service, working in Washington, D.C. Walt had oversight responsibility for the Ranger Activities Division, which included the Fire Management Branch at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho.
I tried to do it simply and honestly and without getting agitated or excited about it, and focus on the fact that, you know, first of all, nobody is getting killed. There are not a bunch of houses getting burned up. This is burning up old, standing, not very healthy in many cases, lodgepole forest. A lodgepole forest is a transcendent forest that is moving in a successional pattern that burns periodically, and if it doesn't burn, it can't rejuvenate itself. And go through that kind of thing with them, because when is it going to go out? We don't know. We're trying to keep it, but everything that we do seems to be compromised. And when I talk about the fact that, okay, you can send a fire crew in there, and in one day in Yellowstone, we lost about 800 miles of hand-dug line, and it jumped right over them. I said, you just keep doing that and you keep getting beat. Your focus is to keep from getting anybody killed. Again, nothing is being destroyed in Yellowstone. We don't know how we're going to stop it. And a lot of people had all kinds of suggestions. I think I told you, people would, I spent a lot of time every day on the phone with citizens who got routed through to me because of public information folks. They quickly would say, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to talk to that ranger I saw on television the other night. So I'd get them, and we'd talk, and one guy said, you need to fill these big transport planes full of crushed ice and fly over the fire because your retardant isn't working. Crushed ice will. And so I thanked him for that and told him I'd pass that on to the people fighting the fire out in Yellowstone. I'm not sure where we would get all that crushed ice, but we'll look into it. People were just panicked. But if you stayed calm, if you weren't BSing them, if they felt like you were telling them the truth to the extent that you knew it, and you're right, nobody was being successful putting the fires out. I got to talk, I think, a couple of times on, okay, why not bulldozers? I mean, we understand that the National Park Service, against the advice of some of the other agencies, does not want to let bulldozers come in there. Isn't this important enough? And so I'd go back and use the Firehole River and the Old Faithful Geyser Basin, and I say, if you put bulldozers shoulder to shoulder and went through there, do you know how many bulldozer swipes it would take to equal the width of the Old Faithful Geyser Basin? No, how many? And I had some figure, 150 bulldozer widths across Yellowstone, and it jumped it all. Now I said, you know what will be there way after the fire is gone? That bulldozer swipe across Yellowstone, and everything else will be growing back just fine. And we will have just destroyed Yellowstone permanently with that swath through there. So I'd focus on those kinds of things, because people truly were in a panic. Were we behind? We probably were behind, and where I think they really got behind sometimes is when a fire was coming right at one of these towns near Yellowstone, and we seem to be behind getting information as to what that fire was going to do, whether it was going to come. Part of that was we didn't know. Part of that was you truly were just guessing. I mean, fire behavior that happened on a scale like that in a given burning period, there didn't seem to be any end to the burning period. I mean, they didn't lie down at night many times. It just kept going. And so I think if we got behind, it was probably on a more local basis. But having said that, I guess internationally it appeared that we were kind of helpless, which we were.
Walt Dabney describes the difficulty in explaining to national and international audiences why the National Park Service wasn't taking certain actions to control the fires in Yellowstone. As he says, he tried to do this honestly and simply and without getting excited. His ability to do this was one of his areas of expertise.
During the summer of 1988, Jack Troyer was the Greater Yellowstone Area Team Leader, a job that required him to coordinate with 6 national forests and 2 national parks.
When I look back on it, and sometimes I'm asked what advice I have for situations like that, really I think that you kind of have to get over the intimidation factor, and you just have to do the best job you can of using your knowledge and experiences and work hard to do the best you can every day. And I think if there's something that I look back at and think that I did right, there were a few times when I wasn't sure what we ought to do, and I learned that it was okay to pick up the phone and call a regional forester or a regional director or a regional fire director or whatever the issue was and say, what do you think? Or go to Rick Gale or Ken Ditmore. And to this day, whether it's that issue or others, it's okay to ask for help. And that, I just look back and think that was an important lesson there when you needed it. You know, there are two choices to take here on an issue. Which way do you think we ought to go?
Jack Troyer has one piece of advice for fire managers involved with a bewildering array of strategic options. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone and to ask for advice, a skill he acquired in Yellowstone in 1988 and carried along with him until he retired as a regional forester in Ogden, Utah. What we are now going to ask you to do is to rise above simply watching these podcasts and challenge you to actually use them to create a personal program of deliberate practice. To begin designing this program, follow these initial steps. Watch Jeff Colvin's video on deliberate practice and read his original Fortune magazine articles found at jeffcolvin.com. Now, taking the areas of expertise described in the above videos, or ones that you've singled out on your own as you listen to the interviews, create a program of deliberate practice for yourself. As you design your program, be aware of these sideboards. Deliberate practice must be designed specifically to improve your performance as a fire manager. Your areas of practice should be designed in such a manner that they can be repeated. Find someone to coach or mentor you as you deliberately practice. It is important to have an impartial person give you continuous feedback. Remember, deliberate practice is hard work and is mentally demanding. But if you are truly interested in making significant progress in becoming a more highly skilled fire manager, there may be no other way. Ted Williams and Pete Maravich exemplify what deliberate practice looks and feels like. Williams, baseball's greatest hitter, would practice hitting until his hands bled. Maravich, whose college basketball records still stand after more than 30 years, would go to the gym when it opened in the morning and shoot baskets until it closed at night.